Recording. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Connie Chang. I am the commissioner for ANC 34G, single member district number 5. I have here Randy Speck, who's the chair as well for ANC 34G, as well as Kaz Cadwell, who's our newest member. We are here tonight, and hopefully you're all in the right place, which is the ANC 34G hosted information exchange session. This is the first one of winter 2022, and the title of this talk is, so you have a small area plan, now what? Putting small area plans into action. This is the 7th, we've held 6 before, and we started in late September and we ended about at the end of October with the 6th. And you can find all 6 sessions before tonight, with the video recording and the chat log on the ANC website at anc3g.org. And there's a tab that says task forces, issue areas, and then choose the small area plan 1, and you'll see the information exchange series. And it really began because we're trying to involve our community, engage our community into topics of interest for the Chevy Chase Small Area Plan, which is led by the Office of Planning, which this small area plan began last spring with the questions of why and what, the vision and goals, and then the Office of Planning is now in the how and where phase. And so critically important is this Saturday, OP is organizing their for us, all of us, our community, the virtual community design workshop. And that will take place virtually. And you should sign up at publicinput.com/Chevy Chase. It's from 10 to 12 p.m. And you will, once you sign up, once you register, they will give you some things to read beforehand so that you can come and you can engage in that process. And that's all about sort of informing us about urban design strategies and policy recommendations and so forth, and us giving them feedback so that they can move forward in this small area planning process. So tonight, I am very happy to welcome Alexandra Cain and Maximilian Tondro, who are our speakers. They both are from the Land Use Section Commercial Division of the Office of Attorney General, and they are here to give us a presentation to help us with what we do after this plan is drafted. You know, what is it that we need to do to make sure that what we'd like to see in this community can come to fruition, basically. We've had several questions in prior sessions about that, and others mentioning that there were other SAPs in the district and wasn't clear that those ideas were implemented. And so we're bringing these 2 speakers tonight. We're so lucky for them to come and to introduce themselves, introduce this, the land use section, which has a new mission. That information, Attorney General Carl Racine sent a letter to ANCs. That letter is also posted on this meeting page, I suppose, on our website, so you can take a look at that, and as well as both the speakers' bios and the mission of their office is there too. So please go there, and I will try my best to copy and paste, but I kind of have trouble doing that. But you could just go to our website and you could see it there. So I will first ask Maximilian Tondro to please introduce yourself, share a little bit of yourself, and then I will switch over to Alex, and then they will give a presentation. And after they give their presentation, I will ask a few questions. The audience, please put your questions in the Q&A. You could use the chat to chat with the host and panelists or with everyone, but I will fold in your questions around 7:25, and then I'll bring in the commissioners with their questions, and then we'll ask Alex and Max for their last words. So I'm hoping to end precisely at 8. If it looks like there's a lot of questions, we'll go to 8:15, but no, not later than that. Okay, thank you so much, Max. Welcome.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Maximilian Tondro. I'm the chief of the land use section of the commercial division of the Office of Attorney General. Joined here by my colleague Alexandra Cain. We are, as Commissioner Chang just mentioned, the land use division until October, was responsible for providing confidential legal advice to the Zoning Commission and the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Since that time, those responsibilities have been taken over by the legal division of the Office of Zoning, which provides staffing to the commission and to the board. And so as a result of that, the Office of Attorney General is now able to advocate in the public interest and for the public interest, which is what we are doing here today, trying to help out, provide support for ANC's community groups and residents to understand the zoning and land use process, which can be more than a little mystifying. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you.
So it's great to be here tonight. Thank you to Connie for setting this up and having us. We think this is a great series of events and webinars that you've done. So like Max said, we do have this new mission, which involves more outreach to the communities and ANCs. And they said basically trying to demystify the process. So that's our main goal here tonight, as you'll see from the presentation, is to try to explain some of the weirdness that comes up around zoning issues and planning issues. And just by way of a little bit additional background, both Max and I have worked with other district agencies. I was in the private sector before coming into work for district government. So we both have sort of a range of experience, both in understanding how the different elements of district government works, and then also sort of what the perspective is from the public side, the private side. So with that, I think I will bring up this presentation. Okay, so let's get rolling. So as Connie said, the sort of theme of tonight is you have a small area plan, now what? What comes next? How do you put the small area plan into action? So just from the outset, the small area plan in and of itself basically serves as a guidance document. It does not automatically result in zoning changes to either the zoning regulations or the zoning map. It requires additional steps to do that. What it does provide is additional guidance to the zoning commission when they review petitions for map amendments, petitions for text amendments, which are changes to the regs, which provide detail about what a specific community is looking for in terms of development. So this is a chance for an ANC, a neighborhood, to really, come in on the ground floor as to what type of development they want to see going forward and build in some parameters that the zoning commission can then use when evaluating these applications and petitions. And you do that, through with the creation of the SAP. So that's the process you're going through now with OP. And then once that is in place, through implementing it through these different types of applications and petitions that we'll get to. So what the comprehensive plan says about small area plans is that they are, a form of supplemental guidance for the commission. They are something that they can consider to the extent that they don't conflict with the comp plan. And they basically start to help refine some of these broader ideas, broader concepts that are in the comp plan into something that, is more able to be translated into material changes in that neighborhood. And I want to say there's a lot of information on these slides, which Connie will be putting up on the website. So don't panic about the amount of information that is there. So some basic concepts sort of to go over at the beginning. What is planning versus zoning? So as mentioned, you've been going through this process with the Office of Planning. And planning is basically the aspirations of development in a city, a neighborhood. And that is what the comp plan is focused on. So the comp plan of the district is adopted by the council and the mayor, and basically looks over a 20-year period and says, how do we want development to occur in the district? What types of development, where, what type of densities? Big, broad picture, pie in the sky, long-term goals, and really just sort of general guidance as to what is acceptable in certain areas of the district and what sort of general goals are trying to be achieved. Where zoning comes in is taking that sort of general guidance and turning it into concrete material changes to the built environment. So that's done through the zoning maps, which designate, the different zone districts and, set the basic parameters for scale of development, and then the zoning regulations, which go even further to say, these are the specifics of what you can build, how you can build it, what uses are appropriate, and puts that into text, which then dictates development. So the zoning regulations of the zoning map can be amended by the zoning commission, which is an independent entity, and are not really tied to the comp plan cycle, other than obviously they have to be not inconsistent with the comp plan, which sort of is a weird concept that we'll get to a little bit deeper into the slide presentation. So then again, sort of by general overview, we want to sort of give you an outline of who the different agencies, entities are that you'll be dealing with in this process. So first of all, you have the zoning commission. So they are charged with reviewing amendments to the zoning map and the zoning regulations, and also reviewing applications for larger projects. So these are going to be things like planned unit developments or PUDs, design review projects, campus plans, projects that encompass a larger geographic area and that have policy implications because of their size. Then you also have the Board of Zoning Adjustment. So this is the body that most ordinary citizens are going to be dealing with. So the board is the body that handles applications for zoning relief. So special exceptions, variances. This can be anything from a business coming in that requires a special exception to operate, to needing either a variance or a special exception to put an addition or a rear deck on your own house. So it's a little bit less formal, it's smaller cases. They also review decisions of the zoning administrator in issuing building permits or certificates of occupancy. So those appeals are typically brought by the ANC if there's an error that is alleged. And then they also hear applications for embassy cases. And then in terms of the other organizations that work with those two bodies, you have the Office of Zoning, which, as Max said, is charged with administrative and legal support for both the board and the commission. The Office of Planning, which provides technical planning expertise. So they're broken into two main areas. They're the sort of the comprehensive big picture planning folks, which is who you've been dealing with. So those are the planners that help develop the small area plans, the comp plan, again, thinking sort of big picture, big scale development goals. And then the development review staff, who review the applications that come before the board and the commission. So they review them for planning consistency with the comp plan and weigh in with that technical planning angle. Then of course there's the ANCs, which have a very critical role in all of these processes. So the ANCs, as you well know, review applications to both the board and the commission, and their issues and concerns are afforded great weight when submitted in their written report. So what great weight means is that if the board or the commission does something that is contrary to those issues or concerns, they have to then explain in writing why they did so. And I do also want to just backtrack a little bit and say that for the Office of Planning, their recommendations, whether to approve or disapprove a project, are also given great weight. So just a slight distinction is with the Office of Planning, it's their actual recommendation, so the yay or nay. Whereas with the ANC, it's a little bit more nuanced. It's what issues or concerns they have with the project to the degree that they are relevant to the zoning decision. And then the other key thing to remember with the ANCs is that ANCs can also be active participants in the process. You are able to bring petitions for amendments to the zoning map and the zoning regulations. And then you are also able to bring appeals, like I said, of decisions of the ZA. And then finally, you have us in the Office of the Attorney General. So now that we are no longer providing that confidential legal advice, we are now charged with serving as independent advocates for the public interest. So what we have done to date is bringing forward text amendments or amendments to the zoning regulations to try to advance issues of concern to the district, primarily right now, affordable housing. And then also working with ANCs like we are tonight to try to explain the process and explain how you can sort of participate more fully and more effectively. And that's also going to be applicable to citizens groups and other organizations. So finally, getting to sort of the meat of tonight, where does the small area plan fit into this whole zoning process? So as we said in the comp plan, the small area plan basically helps supplement the comp plan's general guidance. So this is the opportunity for a community to say, these are our specific planning goals. These are the types of development we would prefer to see. These are the type of design elements we would like to see incorporated into the building, and putting that into a single document, which can then help guide the commission's decisions when they are evaluating these cases that come before them. So it sort of works going forward. And as we'll see, in looking at what sort of the general guidance is, you can then sort of build that into the small area plan, so it sort of moves back and forth through time. Let's see. So 3 main areas. Zoning applications, we said, so these are going to be your PUD cases for the most part, amendments to the zoning map, and then amendments to the zoning regulations, the text itself. So zoning applications, this is going to be primarily in the form of PUDs, as I said. And when a PUD is evaluated by the zoning commission, they are making a determination that it is not inconsistent with the comp plan and any other public policies. That includes a small area plan if there is one in place. And as we'll see, what the small area plan really does when evaluating a PUD is to say, you know, here are the specific guidance, this is the specific kind of things we want to see. Does this project achieve that? Is it in line with what the neighborhood is seeking in terms of development? And the commission can sort of layer that in on top of the general guidance that they have from the comp plan to make an evaluation as to the project's consistency. And then in terms of how the ANC can use it as part of that process, or the community at large, is to say, you know, you have this document that sets out your goals. You can use that sort of early on in the development process with developers and applicants to say, you know, this is what we're seeking. You know, is it possible to incorporate some of these things into your design, or, you know, what you're proposing, and sort of do that sort of at the very outset when negotiations begin, when the developers first come in and, you know, with their project proposals. And then sort of going through the process, using it sort of as a framework to determine, you know, what public benefits you would like to see in a PUD, or any, you know, standalone community benefit agreements, or, you know, what kind of conditions, if any, you would want to impose in a final zoning order. This SAP provides, you know, just sort of guidance to be able to do that and make it more tailored to the needs of the specific neighborhood. Okay. So having covered the applications, we're now going to sort of jump over to discussing the zoning maps, and they build off of the comprehensive plan maps. So what you're looking at right here is the generalized policy map. So these maps in the comp plan provide sort of general guidance on sort of the scope of development that's anticipated for a certain area. So that ranges from conservation to enhancement to change. And again, looking at the 20-year period that the comp plan covers. So for Chevy Chase, what's notable is right now there's a strip that is in dark orange, which is Main Street mixed use. So this is going to be sort of your standard business corridor, you know, ground floor retail, maybe with residential or office uses above, you know, what you think of in that sort of northern strip of Connecticut Avenue. The areas to the side of that are sort of that light yellow beige color are neighborhood conservation areas. So those tend to be lower density, more residential. There's not a whole lot of change anticipated. And it's also worth noting that this is what the map has been. It has not changed in the most recent comp plan amendment cycle. The only thing that has come in is that what you see is that red dotted line, which indicates that it's subject to a future planning analysis area, so that you are going through the SAP process. And this, which I will not read all of the text here, but this is what how the comp plan defines the Main Street mixed use areas and the neighborhood conservation areas. Again, for the neighborhood conservation area, I just want to call out that, you know, it says not that development is prohibited, but any development does need to be in keeping with the sort of existing scale and character of the neighborhood. So that is in there as guidance to, you know, make sure that there are not radical departures from what is existing currently. So then moving on, so this is now the future land use map. So this, as the name implies, shows what the anticipated future uses of different areas of the district are. So this can be the same as what's there currently. There can be a change. In the current or the most recent comp plan amendments, what was added in to Chevy Chase was the addition of moderate density residential. So you'll see that is the striping on that northern portion above Livingston Street. Other than that, the map has more or less remained the same. So those lighter yellow areas to the side are those density residential. To the bottom, below Livingston, you see that there is high density residential that's in there. And then those blue stripes are public facilities. So that is where the library and community center are currently located. And just to sort of clarify, those numbers that you see in bold black text are amendments that were proposed. to the comp plan that have been adopted as part of this. Okay, so again, these are the definitions for the comp plan as to the FLUM designations. A couple things that I want to call out here. Again, I'm not going to read the whole big block of text, but again, to take note that this is general guidance. The comp plan does give a range, both in terms of the densities that are allowed, so that's the FAR number, and as to what zones might be appropriate. They will call out a couple, but they do make clear that there are others that may apply in the given circumstances, and that's sort of where the SAP comes in, is to help the commission understand what is an appropriate zone based on the general guidance, and now we have the specific details of what the community is looking for to help us sort of understand what would be most appropriate. And then one thing to bear in mind when considering the comp plan, it is more than just maps. The maps are sort of what most people sort of focus on. They're bright, they're colorful, they're eye-catching, but there are, in addition to that, different elements and policies that deal with other development issues in the district. So these are going to be things like housing, environmental protection, economic development, and these are all things that the commission has to consider when they're going through and evaluating a project. And I want to use this moment to sort of explain that when the commission is evaluating either a map amendment or a text amendment or a PUD application, they have to make a finding that it is not inconsistent with the comp plan. So that's kind of a weird phrase, but what it basically does is allow for sort of additional flexibility for the commission to make a determination about either an application or petition. So it's not sort of hard and fast. It has to be consistent with every single thing in the comp plan. It has to be that when taken as a whole, it is not inconsistent. So that means there might be a policy here that maybe it doesn't completely line up with, but it lines up with a bunch of other elements. It lines up with the FLUM. So it just gives a little bit of flexibility when trying to analyze these things, because the comp plan is so broad and does encompass so much. Okay. So now as to SAPs and map amendments. So as you went through and you saw on the slides from the text of the comp plan with the FLUM designations, there are a couple different zones that are called out. So that's what we've included in this chart here. So you have the current zones. So south of Livingston Street right now, it is zoned RA4. And to the north, it's zoned MU3A, so it's mixed use 3A. And then the zones that you see on the right side of the slide are the zones that are called out in the text of the FLUM. And we put this up here basically to explain again that there is going to be a range in the zones that are called out. And this is, as I said, sort of where the SAP can come in and be really helpful to the commission, because this allows them to say, okay, in addition to this broad guidance that we have in the comp plan, what is really going to be appropriate for this neighborhood? What do they want to see? What makes sense? And that's really the SAP can be really helpful in, selecting one zone over another if both are called out in the comp plan. And that's something in drafting the SAP when you're working with OP to keep in mind, that you sort of work backwards from these zones that are all of the sort of range of zones that are potentially applicable, and saying which one of these do you prefer? Which one of these is going to allow the uses that we want to see? Which one of these is going to allow the scale of development that we want to see, that has the design features that we want to incorporate? And then in drafting the language of the SAP, incorporating sort of triggers or tells that say, this is what we want to indicate going forward, that there are certain zones and certain types of things that you want to see. And then the last sort of thing that the SAP comes into are amendments to the zoning regulations. So this can be anything from, petitions to change the development standards of a certain zone. So this are things like setbacks or, non-residential FAR limits, which exist in some zones. Can also be requirements for specific uses. If you want to sort of exert additional controls over certain uses in certain areas. And then also trying to incentivize different types of development. So maybe looking for ways to increase housing in certain areas, increasing ground floor retail, and encouraging that kind of development by building in things to the regulations. Like a map amendment, an amendment to the text also has to be not inconsistent with the comp plan, and that includes all of those policies. Then just as an additional detail, Those policies are sort of broken into two main groups. You have the citywide elements, which apply across the district. So these are your sort of big development issues. Again, environmental protection, housing, economic development, and then also area specific elements. So these are tied to the specific geographic area of the city. So for Chevy Chase, it's going to be the Rock Creek West area element, and that's going to have specific goals for development that the comp plan wants to see in that area of the city. And then one thing I did want to sort of highlight here is that amendments to the zoning regulations and the maps can be brought by anyone. Typically, historically, they have been brought by the Office of Planning, but it is not sort of limited to them. It is something that the ANCs can participate in, that community groups can participate in. As you've seen, our office has brought forward amendments, and that is something that we're sort of looking to work with going forward with these different groups, because you are on the ground, you have a good idea of, what might be a solution to issues in certain neighborhoods. So we think it's important that that is something that the ANCs and members of the public, participate in fully, because you definitely have a voice and a role in it. And then this is our last sort of slide, just sort of to reiterate what our role is going to be in all of this. Like I said, Office of Planning are the experts in sort of the planning side of things. They have the technical expertise in that area. Where we view ourselves as coming in being helpful is trying to explain the process, trying to explain how you can work with the plan once it is adopted, and translating it from the planning stage of things into the zoning and material world. So it's like bringing text amendments, bringing map amendments, helping the ANC understand projects that might be brought in connection with these changes. And I think that wraps up everything. And I think hopefully I did not go too horribly over time. And our contact information is there. But at that point, I will, I guess, turn it over to questions.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Alex. That was a lot. It was a lot for people to absorb. But like you said, these slides will be put up. They'll be made available on the ANC 34G website, so people can look at it more carefully. And you could always directly ask Max or Alex a question if it's not clear. And of course, tonight we can go from slide to slide if someone has a specific question. And I did see one that came up, and I believe you answered it, but Maria is asking, so zoning maps can be changed? So let's answer that question. How can they be changed, and when can they be changed? Alex or Max, either one of you.
I'm happy to take that one. Yes,
Yeah.
I think as Alex said, the zoning map can be changed upon approval by the zoning commission. So it involves a petition that would be filed with the zoning commission application to change either an individual property, it can be as small as an individual property, or a group of properties can be subject to a map amendment. This is typically what happens when there is a change in the FLUM or the future land use map as part of the comp plan changes, that there is then a sort of a readjusting of the zoning map. There's applications to say, look, there's been a change in the FLUM, we should also change the zoning to reflect that. And the zoning commission will then consider the case. It's a public process. And then once the zoning commission makes this decision, if it approves it, then the zoning map is duly changed to whatever designation the commission has made its decision.
Okay. And there is another question that came up that I think it would be good to talk about, which is, what is the relationship between zoning and historic preservation regulations? More specifically, land use decision-making takes place completely separately from authority of the DC Historic Preservation Office. Is that not so? So this is Alan who's asking this question.
Yes, so they are separate. The zoning regulations are adopted by the zoning commission, which is independent. And the zoning regulations actually preceded home rule, the original zoning regulations. The historic preservation regulations instead were adopted by council, and those are then under the purview ultimately of the mayor's agent, but initially by the Historic Preservation Review Board, which is staffed by a portion of the Office of Planning that's called the Historic Preservation Office. I will point out that while zoning and historic preservation are separate categories, responding to different boards and different regulations and laws, nonetheless, the Office of Planning is the technical advisor to both of those two boards. The HPO, the Historic Preservation Office, is housed within the Office of Planning, as is also and is part of, it's overseen by the Director of the Development Review branch, which also is the one responsible for working with the Zoning Commission to deal with zoning map and zoning regulation amendments.
Okay, thank you so much, Max. If Alan has a follow-up question to your answer, he should type it in. I'm going to go to the next one before I ask my question, which is Andrea's question. Why does the future planning analysis area extend a block or so east and west from Connecticut Avenue when the future land use map was only altered for the commercial corridor? What does the existence of a future planning analysis area foretell for that area, which is currently occupied by single-family residences? So this question keeps coming up, and I'd like for one of you to just hit it straight on again so that people can.
Sure. So again, remember that the purpose of the small area plan in many ways is to provide a broader and more nuanced, sort of a deeper dive and a more contextual approach than what is often provided in the comprehensive plan. And so therefore, as a result, is looking at a sort of a neighborhood wide, and whereas both the FLUM, the future land use map, and then the zoning, which reflects it, tend to sort of follow more or less property boundaries or streets or elsewhere. We know that in our everyday life, there are interactions that cross over into in the neighborhood, sort of consists not just of that main street, but also the residential neighborhoods that are surrounding it. And so I believe that that is the reason why the future planning analysis area extends a little bit out, just to reflect the fact that that area of Connecticut Avenue is not itself all completely siloed off, but you have to understand that there are these residential neighborhoods around there. Again, I think as Alex mentioned and pointed out, and as you can see in both the general policy map and the future land use map, there is no change to the general policy map. Those, the areas you can see on either side remain then neighborhood conservation areas, where there's no significant increase in density anticipated. And then also the future land use map similarly makes a clear distinction between the low density residential areas surrounding that corridor, which has a variety of different other designations just along that corridor. So I can understand the concern if I hear it correctly, but again, I think it's to try to find the idea behind the future planning analysis areas to have a more holistic approach and not just focus on those very narrow little properties.
And we are right now doing planning. I mean, this is the small area planning process. So there's nothing more in the future. This is what that is meant, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I think that, you know, when people see it and they see future planning, then I think they get a little bit confused, but this is what we're in right now. Okay, so I have a question. So let's say OP is going to finish this design workshop. They're going to hold a few more meetings. They're going to do a design survey. They're going to collect all of the community's input. Then they're going to draft the small area plan. They actually drafted in text for the whole thing, not just the vision and goals, but the whole thing that they've heard, right? Max, explain to us the process, like just in your own words, like what happens from the time that they submit this, the mayoral, you know, hearing, the key in this process. Does the public comments on this process, and when do we see any kind of map amendments or text amendments? When do these things happen? Can you give us that view so that we have some idea?
Sure. So the Office of Planning will finish working with the community to collect the information and to consider all the various different input that comes out of the various different meetings. It will then finalize that small area plan, and then it will present it to council, typically by which considers it by resolution. It will depend upon what exactly the council decides to do with it at that time as to how they want to approach it, but there will usually be an opportunity to participate, or at the very least in terms of filing comments. Then if it is adopted by the council, then it becomes a small area plan that is a supplement to the comprehensive plan. If and when there is a map amendment, an amendment proposed to the zoning map, or a amendment to the zoning regulations that's proposed, or there is an application that would trigger to the zoning commission, generally like a PUD, a planned unit development, that would trigger then a review that would rely on consistency with the comp plan. The small area plan will then play a role. Again, as Alex had said, it's the comprehensive plan that is the main provider of guidance, and then the small area plan provides this additional guidance, again, a more sort of holistic and more neighborhood, finer grained, more focused and deeper review of the overall area. And it's in that context then that the small area plan will play a real role. And so from the standpoint of the community, the benefit of the going through the small area plan process is that it provides that opportunity to provide additional feedback, additional sort of goals and principles that can guide that development. I would say that probably most of it will take place either in terms of a map amendment to change the zoning maps, or for a particular property or a group of properties, or if there is a PUD, a planned unit development, although those require a substantial amount of land, so there's not just every tiny little small parcel that can qualify for that.
So as a follow-up, when that, let's say the council adopts it and then the SAP becomes a supplement to the comp plan, does the Office of Planning take that small area plan and make any changes? I mean, do they read the text of the small area plan and do anything with it?
No, once it's adopted, if there's a resolution by the council to adopt it, then it becomes fixed. It's a final product at that particular time, because it's what the council then has reviewed, and therefore it stops. Just like the comprehensive plan, there was an amendment. If and when there are future changes, then there will be another process that has to be opened and go through public comment and work through that whole process. I should say also, by the way, that again, anytime something comes before the zoning commission, there is a public process. And so there's an opportunity for everybody, whether it's the ANCs or individuals or community groups, to participate to some extent in that process.
Okay, so let me go to another question. John asks the question, is the OAG authorized to participate as a party in zoning cases?
So until October, when we were the when we provided legal counsel to the commission, to the board, obviously we were effectively their lawyer, and as a result, we were not able to intervene publicly. Since those legal responsibilities have been shifted, we are now freed to be able to intervene in a zoning case. That will make that determination on a case-by-case basis as things come forward. Again, the guiding principle will be what the Office of the Attorney General determines is in the public interest. And so that's what we will be looking at as we go forward.
Okay. There's another question. Thanks for a clear explanation of the process. This is from my question, I think, your response, Max. Please clarify that any map amendments related to the upflum will be subject to either IZ plus or negotiation to make sure the value is not a windfall to the property owner, but will result in a substantial increase in affordable housing units.
Yes, so any increase the Office of Planning proposed and the commission adopted what's called IZ plus, which is an amendment of IZ, the inclusionary zoning program, to make sure that with the adoption of the new comprehensive plan and the changes to the future land use map that will, in some cases, many cases, those changes will actually increase the amount of density that can be built on a specific property. The Office of Planning then proposed, the commission adopted this IZ Plus to make sure that that additional density that would come would be subject to an increased inclusionary zoning requirement. And so that is actually what has currently been adopted by the commission.
Well, as a follow-on to that question about affordable housing, you know, Alex, you mentioned that your office just began, right? It's just you're in this new sort of mission. You're undergoing this new mission, but you have actually been working on affordable housing. Can you share with us some of that? What is that work? What have you done so far?
Yeah, so what we've done so far is submit 4 amendments to the zoning regulations, all sort of dealing with different aspects of the inclusionary zoning, the IZ program. So one, which was just set down by the commission, has to do with removing the parking requirements for affordable units. So those units would not have a parking requirement. There's also one removing an exemption from the IZ regs for the downtown zone. So that is something that has been in place for over 15 years at this point. It came in when the IZ program was initially adopted. It's when the district and the downtown in particular was in a much different place in terms of development. And then in addition, another one requiring additional housing benefits if affordable units are provided off-site. That's something that occasionally happens in a PUD. And then I'm honestly blanking on the 4th one.
Sorry, yeah, I'll add in the 4th one was instead a proposal to deepen the affordability requirements for inclusionary zoning units. Based on the fact that of the time change that's happened since the program was first adopted, since the IZ program was adopted, we felt that it was important to try to be able to reach deeper or sort of households that have lower percentage of the median family income, so that basically you could get to lower income households were the ones who are going to be able to be benefiting the most from the inclusionary zoning program. That's oftentimes one of the problems with that program, is trying to reach not just the households that are somewhat below the median family income, but also to reach those that are really, really desperately challenged. So this is our attempt to deal with that.
Yeah, so they're all, like I said, aspects of the IZ program that we had seen from our time dealing with the board and the commission, and there are things that the commission has voiced concerns about publicly. So we saw that as sort of the way to sort of start the process, to start this public dialogue about those issues.
Okay, that's interesting. I have a question as well on affordable housing, which is it seems to be a real demand or need for larger units, for families who are low income. How do you deal with that? Like, how does that work through this process for the district to try to supply more of these 3-bedroom units, which we've heard in a prior information exchange session with the perspectives of residents in the apartment buildings here, who what we've learned is that they see families renting, meaning couples who rent, and then they have their first child. They can continue to stay there because there's enough room. Then they get to their second child. Then they grow out of the space, and so it becomes difficult for them to stay where they are. And then they go look, and it's not affordable elsewhere. And there's not a lot of supply, for 3-bedroom units. So what can be done there? Can you share with us, Max, what your thinking might be for the district, because it is of public interest, I think.
Absolutely, we agree. And so in the text amendment that we proposed, both for the one for offsite inclusionary zoning compliance, as well as for the lower levels of household income reserved, for which the IZ units would be reserved, we tried to put in there also additional incentives for developments that provided either lower levels of affordability, lower levels meaning deeper affordability, or also developments that provided IZ units that had 3 bedrooms or more, because this is something that the comprehensive plan did identify and called out. It is a problem I think that everybody recognizes is a serious one. And I think it's probably going to be a lot of little changes that will hopefully end up resolving, or not resolving, but addressing it. And so I think that's what we're trying to do right now, is to try to see if we can't incentivize that through these text amendments. And I should say that the Office of Planning adopted one of the Office of Planning inclusionary zoning recent amendments that was adopted. Their commission also sought to try to incentivize the developers' creation of those additional of those larger units by trying to give effectively a discount on the number or the size of the units that are part of IZ.
Okay, thank you so much, Max, for that. Here's another question. Ronald is asking, your very significant or impactful OHG zoning text proposed changes were not mentioned. I'm not sure what that exactly means. Is there a review process that the public can participate in or with, like the comp plan process?
Yes, so that those are before the 4 that we filed are before the commission right now. They have set down for a public hearing the one that Alex mentioned about that sought to incentivize the creation of affordable housing units by waiving the parking requirements for those units. That one is, I think it's going to be that is scheduled for a public hearing on March 21st, and the public can participate in that one. And then the other 3 are awaiting a set-down report from the Office of Planning. And so once the Office of Planning submits that set-down report, the commission will consider it. And then if the commission agrees, assuming that the Office of Planning recommends set-down, maybe with some changes, then there'll be the opportunity for public participation going further on the basis of the proposal. And so yes, it is definitely a public participation, in which OAG is very supportive of. And I would just, if I can just tag on, there's a comment by Andrea Rosen I noticed in the Q&A asking about the IZ Plus, which I think is a very important issue, which is, I had mentioned that the IZ Plus, there would be that amendment addressed or made sure, or sought to make sure, that any additional density that came with a FLUM would have an additional inclusionary zoning requirement. In other words, if there was a map amendment that increased the amount of density allowed on a parcel, that therefore there would be an increase in inclusionary zoning requirement. That is true in a broad sense, but Andrea is also right. There are the devil's in the details, and so the fact of the matter is that because the particular owner can choose how they want to build their the project on a particular site, it may very well be that they don't have, if they don't use all of that additional density, they may not have a higher inclusionary zoning requirement. But just to address that one.
Yeah, that's like the sort of a little bit more of what could possibly happen.
Right, and definitely in the weeds.
Definitely in the weeds. Okay, so Ellen, well, maybe let's stick with, Daniel is asking, does OHG have the capability to do the financial analysis required to make these changes to the IZ program? That's a good question. Like, so in terms of your capabilities in-house.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that the Office of Planning has, they are, as the planning agency, they have the local in-house expertise, and that is what they have been dealing with. In general, I think it would really depend upon the specifics specific modeling that's required for a particular text amendment. And so, for example, in one of the ones that we proposed to be set down, the commission asked us to prepare some additional financial modeling. I will question if that doesn't become a bar potentially to prevent any entity or individual from raising a possible change to the text amendment by forcing them to pay for financial modeling. One might say that if the Office of Planning has that capacity, then they should be providing their modeling to the commission and allow that as an analysis of the proposed changes, and allow the commission to weigh in. And if the individual, the entity who is proposing it, wants to respond to the Office of Planning modeling to critique it, then they would have that burden to address that. But we are working on that particular one.
All right, so Ellen is asking, one, have you done any financial analysis of whether requiring deeper levels of affordability will make it uneconomical to develop anything residential?
So I think that is a complicated answer, one that we believe needs probably to be evaluated in the light of day. So it's both sort of something where the Office of Planning can respond, but also the individual property owners can respond. And probably some of the best way for that to happen is through a public process, as opposed to having it take place in behind curtains, as it were, behind closed doors. So I think there's no question that trying to provide affordable housing is not an obvious or easy answer, short of somehow minting, $100 billion that we can just give out. And so it's going to take a lot of interaction, a lot of different proposals, a lot of different ideas working together. And I think that there is also, where clearly the lower you go down in affordability requirements, right? In other words, the lower the household income that you're trying to reach through a requirement in zoning, the more likely you're going to have financial contribution from the government. And so that would be obviously like the Housing Production Trust Fund. So I think, but if we never require a 30% median family income, which is quite low, then will it ever be built? And I think we've seen with recent OIG, the Office of Inspector General investigation of the Housing Production Trust Fund, there's been problems trying to allocate the resources to get to those very low income households. So our thought here is to make sure that if we start to provide them, then there can be, if it's a requirement, then we'll end up in a situation where maybe the Department for Housing and Community Development can then start to dedicate a certain stream that would then end up supporting some of these additional units. But that we have to start off with a requirement to start that conversation. Otherwise, it just simply becomes an aspiration that never has any achievement.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So here, Ellen has another question that I'd like to keep going down this path here. One area which would benefit from legal analysis is what legal/zoning tools are available that could help preserve small retailers at the street level if buildings along Connecticut Avenue were to be redeveloped. Any interest? Now, this is very important. I mean, this is very important. It keeps coming up. Our community really doesn't necessarily want to see big box, retailers, the big names here. We love the local entrepreneurs who come, and because it gives it a distinct kind of flavor or feeling, when we're here, and we feel like we're supporting the small entrepreneurs. So what is your answer to that in terms of any interest from the OAG?
Definitely interest. Absolutely. If we can, I mean, that's precisely, if we can help out, we'd love to work with community members, or including Director McCarthy, who has an extraordinary amount of experience that she can, that we would love to partner with, but also with the ANC or individual groups. Obviously, as I think Director McCarthy knows, and others, it's not quite as simple as just simply saying you can't do this, because we also have the economic situation behind, which can be hard for small retailers. But we certainly have an interest in trying to work with and collaborate with anybody to try to see if we can come up with some kind of incentives or other kind of amendments to the zoning regulations to try to make sure that those small retailers are able to remain and contribute to the character of the street.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I let's go to Richard. Richard wants to go back to this Alan Sieber's question. How does historic preservation interact with zoning or with the generalized policy map? GPN.
So the generalized policy map is obviously part of the comprehensive plan, and that is really the guiding document, not just for zoning, it's for all sort of governmental decisions. But the zoning is sort of parallel to historic preservation, but they are separate. They run really parallel to each other. They can overlap, but they are completely separate because they are, again, separate commissions, separate boards that have different rules and different procedures for participating. Yeah.
Okay. So here's another question from Ronald. Sorry, Connie. Assuming approval of all text changes with affordable, I guess, housing at the library campus. This is the Chevy Chase Public Library and the Chevy Chase Community Center as a campus, developed together with affordable housing. Would those changes likely reduce green space, parking at the campus site? Now, I don't see how Max or Alex, you guys can really answer that. I think that some of us have talked about like having underground parking, but of course seniors really want to see above ground parking. They find underground to be, tougher for them. I don't really know if you want to respond to that, Max, this question.
I think I would just say that I'm not sure what specific text changes the question is asking about. And then I think even if they are, let's say, text changes to the zoning regulations, it would then ultimately depend upon the proposal and the project going forward. And given that it's the library campus, there's also not just the zoning regulations or historic preservation, there's also would be the involvement of either DCPL and or the mayor's office, DIMPED, in trying to figure out how that project would ultimately end up. So I think there's a whole bunch of other inputs that would change that outcome.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn to Commissioner Cadwell, who'd like to ask 2 questions. Chaz, okay, great. Yes, why don't you ask your questions?
Thank you. One of the reasons for the questions about the historic district or the historic issues is the issue of design review. And you talked about the zoning agencies looking at the scale and character of buildings. And people in this community like the way the avenue looks and are concerned that we look like Bethesda as this thing moves ahead. Is there any actual ability in the zoning process to deal with those sorts of concerns, or in an SAP, I guess, more specifically?
I think the SAP is probably one of the better ways to do so. I think currently obviously the comprehensive plan sets sort of the base guidelines in terms of the future land use map. And that then feeds directly into zoning, which determines, as you saw from Alex's slide, the various different possible zones that could comply with the FLUM designations. So that will determine sort of the maximum that's generally going to be allowed. But at the same time, there are other aspects, let's say, for example, setbacks on the upper floors. So the height may be increased, let's say, to 50 feet. If that's what the commission determines, if there's a request to the commission and the commission determines that that is appropriate. But then there might be possible to have, as I said, setbacks on the upper floor to try to make sure that that there's less of a domination of the streetscape, or other similar aspects can always be can be proposed and then adopted by the commission if that makes sense. And part of what would be the justification for that would be the small area plan. So as part of that small area planning, the design shred, which officer planning I think is going to be holding for you all, then that gives that opportunity to really sort of try to imagine what kind of streetscape you want and to establish then those as principles and goals that then the commission should consider when it is evaluating a proposed map amendment or a zoning text change or an application for like a planned unit development. And I would say that oftentimes to the extent that there is an individual project, because I will point out that with a map amendment, it's not, the commission is not considering a specific project. It considers instead the theoretical build out that will be allowed under Zone A versus Zone B. But those zones there are multiple zones that could apply. And so that's one of those things to start looking for, look at those zones, see which ones have different aspects that the community might like. And then you can identify those in the small area plan, as I said, for example, setbacks at the upper floors or other aspects. Those then help lead the commission to choose between Zone A versus Zone B, both of which could be not inconsistent with the FLUM designations in the comprehensive plan. So that's for the map amendment for a project. And I would say too, that the owners of the property, when they are considering what what zone to propose as part of a map amendment, or if they have an application that goes before the commission, they're going to be looking very closely at the small area plan and sort of saying, oh, this guides us, let's see what we can build within what they have said. And they will feel at the very least, even if they want to go for a different zone than what would normally be than what, let's say, the small area plan seems to suggest, then they would at least have to respond to why it is that they want to sort of ignore that aspect of the small area plan guidance. And so I think it becomes sort of a starting point, both once the commission actually considers it as a public process, but also even beforehand, it starts to help the owners try to see what they can do with their individual property.
Right. So the things like the scale, intensity, and type of lighting, or the mass of a building, takes up what used to be 4 storefronts becomes 1. Are those things that can be set in a small area plan?
They can certainly be identified in the small area plan. Again, the small area plan is just a supplement to the comprehensive plan to the extent it doesn't contradict. And even the comprehensive plan, again, is aspirational. So the strength of both the small area plan and the comp plan is that aspirational. It's that opportunity to say, this is what we're looking for. This is the broad vision. And so identifying those things as you're talking about, the mass, that you want to have smaller storefronts, that you, rather than having 5 lots bought up together and the entire facade just reduced into one massive facade, for example, those can be issues that are identified again in the small area plan. It's something then that owners of property and the commission will grapple with when it comes before them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to adopt it or that they have to change their plans or whatever the particular zone they're proposing, but it does become a focal point. It forces that discussion. It can force that discussion about that. I will point out again, when I say it can force the discussion, that's where it's also going to take folks to appear before the commission, to file comments, to raise this issue, to say, look, we went through the small area plan and the small area plan identified this. We think this is really important. The small area plan said so, and yet we find this application is sort of missing this key component. And so it's important to remember that just because the small area plan, when the small area plan is done, that's not the end of it, that they're really the citizens, the folks who have spent, because I can understand it's a lot of time that's invested to go through these processes. And one feels oftentimes like, we have this document, it's great, it's approved by council, this is wonderful, it's all going to be okay. Yeah, but it's just the start. You then one has to make sure that you continue through that, monitor, make sure that you keep an eye on what's going through when it comes to the commission, and then remind everybody of what those key components and those key elements are that you were able to get into the small area plan.
Okay. My second question may be a bureaucratic one, but I don't think so. And that is, the Office of Planning is appointed by the mayor and presumably works in the public interest. You work for the Attorney General, who's separately elected, but is there a different public interest that you're representing?
I think, as the Attorney General has said, I mean, I think both the mayor and the Attorney General are independently elected by the residents. And in both cases, they can be, I think the term that he used, they can be fired by the residents. If the residents feel that the vision of the individual in either office is not consistent with what the residents want, that direction. I think that so then as a result, not only can a mayor and an attorney general have different images or understandings of the public interest, but also mayor one and their successor, or the attorney general or his or her successor, can also differ. And so I think the public interest is, it can differentiate, I mean, I think that, let's be honest, I mean, there's no question that there is a difference of opinion, and we can see that even on the council or within an ANC, where a particular project comes into an individual ANC, and there's a difference of opinion, legitimate difference of opinion as to what's in the best interest of that particular ANC or of the council, on the council, or between the mayor and the attorney general.
All right, so as you're launching your new role, are you going to develop that vision on a case-by-case basis, or do you have some sort of a guiding document that people could look at to have a sense of what you'd be interested in, as opposed to the Office of Planning and the others?
Sure. I don't believe that from a 30,000 feet in the air viewpoint, there's that much of a difference in terms of what we all define as public interest. We all want to make sure that the district is a more inclusive city, that all of the residents are able to have an equal opportunity, and so forth. It's just oftentimes that it's going to come down to the specifics of how that is addressed, and those are just sort of balancing priorities and trying to figure out how that will work out. So I think for the Attorney General, what has been key, and this is more of a, let's say, partially sort of with the idea of coming from the legal framework, is really a sort of an issue of procedural equity, and trying to make sure that everybody has a voice at the table, that everybody is heard. Oftentimes zoning is a strange little, weird little world. And, for folks who are not part of zoning and not familiar with it, it can be quite difficult to understand and to get in. It can be a bit mystifying. And so what I think the Attorney General really wants to make sure is that everybody has that ability to be able to participate equally and have their voice heard, just as much as those who are the regular players, like Alex and myself, who understand and talk effectively in code because we understand what the regulations are, that there is a fairness there. And so to the extent that Alex and I, that our section can help out folks who don't otherwise have access to those resources, that's really where I think the Attorney General is interested in doing. I think other areas that I think we've identified are also areas of environmental justice, racial equity, and affordable housing are sort of some of those top basic principles. But again, I think we can all agree that everybody who's in the government agrees in general on those as goals. It's a question of how you get there that may have different departures.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you so much, Chaz. I do have a follow-up on your question, which is that let's say we get the draft SAP, and we feel like the text that's in the draft doesn't really talk too much about sustainability, which some people really certainly care about. Could the ANC ask the OAG for help in being able to put in suggestions, like for change, that will get us there? Words matter, right? I mean, so words matter. So how do we do that? How are you going to help ANCs do that? Or can you? In what way? What's your thinking?
Sure. I think we would be open, again, as with everything. It would depend on the specific situation. I think we'd be happy to be there to help support an ANC or a community group. So please reach out to us and ask us. I think we have no problem in theory reviewing that. Then I think, it may be that depending on where it is in the process, that it is something which is better brought up, let's say, before the council, or depending on what the situation is, or in terms of the Office of Planning's view on it, they have their own processes that has to go forward. But we would be happy to try to help out as we can.
Okay, so there's another question, which is that Daniel has put forward, which is, it's very similar to my next question, actually. So I will read his question and then I'll add my little question in there. So the question is, I would be interested to hear how the OAG might approach a situation where the comp plan and mayor's priorities for affordable housing and social equity are in conflict with the community's desire to avoid change. So So this gets to my question, which is, there is this core. So the council has a committee on racial equity, and core is independent, and core looks at every piece of legislation and provides their own independent assessment. Can OAG do the same in the land of zoning, provide some kind of independent assessment that comes in? So it kind of complements Daniel's question, but maybe you could answer these two separately, but they are sort of the same here.
Sorry, unmute myself first. Yes, in terms of Daniel's question, first of all, I would point out when was that the mayor's priorities for affordable housing and social equity are the mayor's priorities, right? And as we just talked about, so the AG may have his own, which may or may not overlap in terms of how we get there. But both of those are just the policies of those two branches. The comprehensive plan is different because the comprehensive plan was adopted and is effectively a law. It's a governing principle. So the comprehensive plan is what it is and is overall more controlling than the affordable housing or the social equity provisos. Now, that's not to say that they're against each other, but just wanted to point out that there is a distinction between those two. In terms of if there is a disagreement or a conflict between what an individual community desires and what has been identified by, let's say, the mayor, again, that's going to be one of those situations where OAG will have to review and determine what the public interest. And again, I would fall back on that example and of an ANC that may also have divisions as to how to deal with a specific project or how to deal with a problem. And so, or an issue that's confronting the community, the specific local community. I think just as with an ANC or on the council, there will be then a review done by OAG to determine where it is that the OAG believes that the public interest lies. And again, that will come from the Attorney General down because ultimately that, as he had said, the Attorney General is, works for the district residents, and the direction that he provides is one that can be corrected by a firing, as it were, if the residents deem that they want another approach.
Thank you so much. Now we're at the 8:12 p.m. hour, so I'd like to make sure that, yes, Commissioner Gore, if you have a question, please ask it. And I believe that Commissioner Zeldin he was in the audience. He's still there. If he wants to ask a question, I'm going to ask him to put it in the Q&A. Lisa?
Yeah, just really quick, Maximilian, going back to Commissioner Chang's question on the equity aspect. So are you aware of the racial equity component that was amended to the comp plan? So how would you guys, and I think that's an issue with Office of Planning as well, is that it's in there, but there is no, I guess, operational aspect to that. So how do we put that into operation? Have you guys discussed that at the OAG?
Yes, we have. And so I believe what you're speaking about, Commissioner Gore, is the comprehensive plan, that the element of the requirement of the comprehensive plan that the Zoning Commission adopt or create a tool that can be used to apply a racial equity lens to all zoning applications or all zoning cases, including text amendments and so forth. And so, yes, that was. We are very aware of it. It's something that we are looking into. I think, again, it is something where we believe that there should be some kind of actual process set up. So we are looking into how we think that would best be constructed. Might be constructed and proposed to the commission. Obviously, anything that would be applied would have to be adopted by the commission. So that would be a text amendment to the commission that would be proposing to change the zoning regulations to require certain applications to provide certain information. So the question would be what kind of information that should consist of, and so that and then what kind of analysis, and presumably to ask the applicant to justify, to conduct that analysis, have the Office of Planning conduct a responsive analysis, give ANCs an opportunity to weigh in on it, as well as the public at large before the commission makes a determination on that.
Yeah, that's great. Glad to hear that. I think that's really important, especially when we know there's been so much displacement in the city. Having that as a component of the racial equity lens is really critical. Thank you.
And I should say too that one of the things that we believe very strongly in that is, should we be bringing forward an amendment on that one, we would very much hope and view it as a starting point for discussion, because obviously it's something where everybody has different views and different ideas, and I think the important thing would be to have that public participation. So please stay tuned, and if there are, and I think as an earlier question was, yes, please, by all means, once amendments are filed, proposed amendments, please participate. We hope you might agree with us, but it is more important is that you participate as well in the civic exchange.
Thank you.
Just to follow up quickly on Max's point there, he said hope that you would agree with what we're putting forward, but we think it's also important that if there are, constructive criticism or alternate views, that those get into the record as well, because we certainly do not have a monopoly on ideas. There are great ideas at the ANC level and in the public in general, so we want to make sure that those are getting into the process and that the public is fully participating, and that goes to that idea of procedural equity, making sure that all voices are being heard.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So that was a great question, Commissioner Gore. Thank you for asking it. So now we're at the hour, really. I'd like to know if Alex or Max, if you have any parting words, anything you want to emphasize or say to us before I close out the session.
I think I would just reiterate what both Alex and I have said, which is that, we are here to try to help out as we can, whether it's through explanation or training to answer questions. If there are issues, concerns, whether those might be eventually lead up to a potential text amendment or involvement somehow in the small area planning process, we're happy to try to help out, to take a look and evaluate. And the same thing with individual cases or applications that may raise public interest issues. And so please reach out to us. We have we provided our contact information, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Would you like to say anything, Alex, before? Would you like to
Basically
add
just
anything?
seconding everything that Max said. Truly, any issues, concerns, questions you have, feel free to reach out to us. We are excited to hear from you.
Okay, thank you so much for all the work you did to prepare your presentation, to give your presentation, to field all these questions. I am so grateful. And on behalf of the commission, we're so grateful. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to stop the recording, but wait 1 second. Okay, it was a thank you. I was like, there's another question. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, and then we're just going to hang on for a little bit while I just make sure I have all the Q&As and the sort of that matter. But thank you so much. I really do appreciate you, and thank you for being the speakers for session 7 of our information exchange series. Thank you.